Hola amigos, bien o no, y saludos desde Medellín. Hoy el tema es cuando nosotros empezamos para mejorar o estudiar nuestra nueva lengua. ¿Dónde? ¿Dónde comenzamos? Y también, ¿cómo comenzamos? Esa es la pregunta de hoy. So, hello again from Medellín. Theme of today, if we're starting our new language, or we're starting on that point where we're trying really hard to improve it, where do we start? Or in some ways, how? Where and how? This is the theme of today. So, I was talking with a new student of mine, and that pretty much was the question. Where do I start? What do I do? How do I do this? So, my answer to that is a fairly common answer. I'd say, well, okay, where do you want to go with this? Why are you learning the language to begin with? Because that could be a very easy answer to point you in the right direction. So it could be, or I'm going on holiday, or it's because of my job, something like that. That gives you a way to focus to begin with. But even with that, it's probably more to do with, are you looking, this is something you need just for like a short visit, a very surface level understanding, or is this somewhere where you're going to go and live or spend a lot of your time using that language? Because that again is going to change perhaps your approach. But let me give you an example from my learning of Spanish, and hopefully this will make it a bit clearer. So when I first came to Colombia, in a way I hadn't really planned to. It was a bit of a surprise thing in many ways. So I hadn't learnt any Spanish before I arrived. But once I'd been here a while, it was pretty obvious what my routine was. And that's how I based my studies. I looked at it in terms of, okay, well, what kind of conversations am I trying to have most days of the week? I could identify those, and they haven't changed that much actually. If I look at it now, what I did really today is pretty much a good example of it. So I looked at, let's look at what I did today. So I went to the supermarket, I ran some errands there, I went to the library, did a bit of studying there, and then large part of the rest of the day I was dealing with my students. So there we go, that gives me like 3 main topic areas that I have conversations on fairly regularly. So shopping, those kind of day-to-day type chores. Studies at the library, but with that we can use vocabulary as well. We're asking for things like when we go shopping, that kind of stuff. And talking with my students. So in that sense I'm talking about common topics, about maybe how to improve their language, things they could practice, these kind of suggestions. So straight away I have 3 topic areas that I can start with in terms of, okay, these are conversations I need to have. What would I like to say? What would be my ideal conversation in each of these situations? And that gives me a start point, because then I can model some useful sentences, some useful questions that I might like to ask, or maybe people would ask me, and that gives me a place to start my practice. So I'm going to start with something that has a very practical application. As I'm doing that, I'm then going to worry about things like grammar rules and how I express that in the future tense instead, but I'm going to deal with that as that comes up. Because often that's not appropriate for particular conversations. You just need to be able to ask how much the shopping is, and could you have a bag, or I would like so many kilos of oranges please. It's not a complicated conversation. Talking perhaps in my case to my students, when I have to explain more complicated topics, that might be a bit more tricky. I might need more complicated vocabulary. And things like if I'm studying, again, this might show me there's some vocabulary I need to work on. But that's really the best way to do it, I find, is if you're thinking, okay, look, I want to improve my English now. I know I can understand a bit, but I want to get better. Okay, but realistically, that's quite a long process and quite a big project. Make it easy on yourself. Find something to focus on to begin with. If you don't have an obvious candidate for that, in the sense of, or I need to pass this exam, or it's for my job, if you don't have that type of focus, keep it simple. Stick to things you already know. Look at what you did today. Look at the conversations you had today. Unless these conversations are one that I've never had that conversation, I can't remember the last time I had that conversation with those people, that will be a rare event. But all the general repetitive conversations you have most days, that's your normal routine. Start there. Work out how you want to say that. Practice that as your dialogue piece, because then you're talking about things you're already familiar with. And even if you change the location and you move even as far as I have to another country, pretty much your routine's fairly similar. Because in the end, we do tend to fall into a pattern of things we like to do. So at least some of the things you did before will be very similar to what you're doing now. So that practice isn't lost. So there we are. That's the theme of the day. If you're not quite sure where you should start, how you should start to focus your practice to improve, just look at what you did today. That's a good enough place to start. Start with the dialogue you need. Let the grammar follow that. Déjame saber en los comentarios, como siempre. But for now, from Medellin, we'll say cheerio.